Last but not least, we hear from Sashi Chandrasekharan, CIO at Stellant Systems, and Eric Liebowitz, CISO at Thales North America. They'll discuss the dynamic between security, IT departments, and board of directors. Sashi has 26 years of experience in manufacturing organizations and served as Director of Digital and IT at Parker Hannifin and leader of Digital CX and Data Analytics for Aerospace Group. His IT leadership has required him to face compliance requirements and deliver solutions that align with broader company goals. Eric has spent nearly 2 decades in the cybersecurity space, including experience building and maturing information security programs for large financial services and technology organizations. He holds CISSP, CISA, and CISM certifications, and is a member of the ICACA National DC Chapter and ISC Squared. These C-suite executives will speak to the breadth of cybersecurity's impact within an organization, how IT and security can work together, and what goes into getting board of directors, well, on board. Thanks for joining us today, Sashi and Eric.
Sashi, Eric, thanks so much for taking the time to share your experience and perspective with our audience here today. Obviously, everyone here is focused on CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, and compliance. But as each of you know, the devil's in the details. And there is no compliance without IT and security. We always see it as kind of a 3-piece puzzle: IT, security, and then the regulatory compliance piece. But I want to start there. I want to start with the IT and security piece. And particularly, Sashi, we heard kind of your background and all of the kind of things you have responsibility for. And of course, cybersecurity and compliance professionals will always tell their CIO, someone like you, we have to fund security and compliance initiatives. It's number one priority. But obviously, as a CIO for a large aerospace and defense contractor, you have responsibility for both IT and security. So I'd love to hear, how do you think about funding cybersecurity and balancing that against the needs of the business? You can't say yes to everything, right?
Right. Yes. So if you, the way I want to start is security is the foundation of anything and everything we do, right? Because I've been in this industry for more than 25 years, and always security has been an afterthought, especially because I come from a business systems background, and we kind of write the application and then we say, oh, what are we doing about security, right? The paradigm has shifted, and I really feel that the security should come first, and then everything comes on top of that, right? So that is where my personal philosophy is, right? So for me, so the cybersecurity guys or compliance guys, they have an easy way with me, is like they understand where I'm coming from, right? But one thing I wanted to be is I wanted to be practical. It's not about check the box, or we got to do this just because someone said. Someone has to actually, my security team has to come and convince me that this is the right thing to do for the business. So when we have that, the right thing, the compliance part of it, being, adhering to our standards, everything kind of falls in place, and it becomes an easy sell for our organization to say, okay, we have to adopt all of these things together, not just, there is no one is more important than other, because you need security to kind of make sure we are saving the company, keeping our company safe. And other side, IT is about productivity. So these both are a critical piece for us to run the business.
That's a great way of summarizing things, Sashi. It's interesting you use the word foundation, because I remember when CMMC was first presented, and one of the things Kevin Fahey, who was with the Department of Defense at the time, and Katie Arrington, they used similar terms around security is now foundational to everything we buy. It's a table stakes. It's not it can't be an afterthought. And so that's great alignment to see that between the way industry's thinking about it and the way I know the DoD is thinking about it. So then Eric, as a Chief Information Security Officer for a global corporation where the sun never sets on your responsibilities, you have ownership for both compliance and what I'll call operational cybersecurity, actually defending against threats. How do you think about and how do you approach the business where there are investments that need to be made? What's the business case for security?
But it's, I agree with what Sashi said in the beginning. Security has to be foundational. Years ago, we were an afterthought. So you go through the whole system development lifecycle. We would spend weeks or months building a new solution or capability, and then security would look at it and say, nope, that's all wrong, you can't do it. And the cost to implement security afterwards is astronomical. So I love the idea of it being foundational. The way that we do it, and the way I've done it at many companies, is really having a process to take business requirements in and balancing them out with IT requirements, let's say for new projects or new capabilities, and using what we call a value score, because our goal is to deliver value to the business. We don't want to do IT or do security to the business. We need to deliver value to help them with their business, give them a competitive advantage, help them automate and ease the work that they do. And so we've built a process where we collect requirements from the business lines, and we have a value scoring process to where we look at things and understand with different criteria, does it make the business more productive? Does it reduce headcount or cost? Is it helping with some compliance means that they have to follow? And so in doing that, we found ways to balance business requirements with security projects and IT projects, because like you said at the beginning, Eric, there's no unlimited budget. So we have to work inside of some constraints, but we do have some exceptions in there. For instance, as we're with Thales specifically, we are not a defense contractor primarily. So we have to balance the commercial side of the business with the defense side. But in the case of compliance, we score it as a 99999, meaning it has to get done. It's at the top of the project list. So things like compliance to CMMC and DFARS has to happen, or we won't be able to do business in those business lines. So that's how we balance it out. We find a fair way to value score each project, but in some cases, especially when it comes to compliance, they move to the top of the list.
Yeah, I love the idea of focusing on requirements, because really, I mean, when you do that and you can kind of align that with the foundation, the resources and the business case should flow directly from that. And the fact, Eric, that you mentioned you're not exclusively a defense contractor, I think is important for our audience today, because many of the, we should have a couple thousand people at this conference today. Many of the folks here have both commercial elements of their business, or even within the government, non-DoD elements of their business. So it's important, and I think it's relevant that many of the folks here have to serve many customers. One of the other things that you kind of brought to mind, and I'm going to ask Sashi here, is that just the supply chains. And I think obviously in a post-COVID world, we are all much more aware of our supply chains, how reliant we are upon them, how vulnerable they can make us. And, I wanted to ask Sashi, given the reality of kind of the new awareness of our supply chains, what's your advice for vetting the IT supply chain to manage business risk? And are there like one or two key things you could tell us about what you look for when managing your suppliers?
So when you talk about suppliers, I'm guessing you're talking about both the product supply as well as the IT supply chain, right?
I think that's an important point. Absolutely.
Yeah. So yes. So again, I think what we have done internally at Stellant is we have made IT part of the vendor selection process, or there is a process where actually when we onboard vendors, we have a set of requirements. We talk, it's process driven. We have a checklist. Vendor qualification is one of the things is about their security, how secure their organization. Again, we can't do that for everyone because we've got a lot of mom and pop. So we identify those vendors and say, okay, what is that we are transferring data between us? Because that's one of the places where we are vulnerable from a supply chain perspective, right? When you're exchanging data. So we kind of realize we kind of analyze our risk and say, okay, we need this, or we ask the suppliers to do. If the suppliers cannot do, because that's not what their core competency is, they just make some small parts. So we try to make sure that we cover ourselves and make sure when we get data from them or how we exchange, we control that aspect of it. So that's on the product side, on the manufacturing side. On the IT side, again, so you guys bring up a good point. We are also both commercial as well as defense contractors, and even in the commercial aspect of it, there's a lot of IP related, because what we make is very unique product, and we have very few or maybe one competitor in the world, and so it's very important for us to kind of protect our IP too, just apart from cybersecurity, right? So that's what DoD is also doing. So we take that very seriously, even on the commercial space side. So what we do is when our suppliers, especially on the IT side, the suppliers are also global in the world. The ITAR export compliance, even if they are dealing with DoD customers or the primes, it slowly starts taking the back and people forget about it. Like, oh, there's an ITAR requirement for when we deal with Stellant. So first thing is like we kind of educate them or remind them that, hey, we need this. This is the starting point. So that even before we start talking about their capability, we understand whether they are aware of our export compliance requirements as when you're dealing with us. So that's the starting point, right? So again, going back to the foundation. So once we have that, then the next aspect of it starts saying, we start looking at what customer base they have worked. So next is validating whether have they worked in an environment where what we are looking for, or they're willing to work, right? Sometimes they don't come with that. Maybe the first customer they're working on who has a DoD supplier or doing some space program, which is really highly secret programs. So we really work with them, create some good NDAs, and make sure that we partner with them and bring them up to our level of security needs and compliance needs. So that's how we go about our supply chain, managing our vendors and our supply chain.
Yeah, it's amazing to think how far we've come in that regard, because as I heard you describe it, one, IT has a seat at the table. So as the CIO, I can hear clearly from a business perspective, IT has a seat at the table to be able to interact with suppliers as you kind of onboarding on the manufacturing side, as you described it. And then as importantly, I think we've moved past, and certainly you have at Stellant, the way you described it, the kind of shaming of suppliers or lecturing of suppliers. I like the way you said educating suppliers. It may be their first time dealing with some of these requirements, and the kind of team sport approach and kind of understanding you have to educate your suppliers. I think it goes a long way, because there are many of our customers have similar situations in terms of having smaller suppliers who don't have the resources to face off to some of the larger companies or to have all these things in place. And so, Eric, along those same lines, thinking about supply chain risk, specific to CMMC compliance, where primes have to flow the requirements down contractually to their subcontractors, what are the best practices you think of for managing subcontractor risk, either specific to CMMC or otherwise?
So, this is a topic that has moved from, in my opinion, the back burner many years ago to the front of mind for almost every security team out there. When you look at recent breaches that have changed the game, like SolarWinds, or the most recent MoveIt vulnerability, where bad actors were able to get into corporate organizations and access their data because they trusted updates from their supply chain. And so this is something that we have to start paying a lot of attention to, because bad actors have really shifted their tactics to focus on this now more than any other type of attack. So, and this is very prevalent in smaller suppliers, like you just mentioned, that don't have big IT or big security teams. And so we need to work with them to help them out. One of the ways that we're doing that, whether it's regarding CMMC or otherwise, is to start putting language in our contracts with our suppliers that state things like the basic level of security that we're expecting from them, right? Whether it's encryption or multi-factor authentication, but making sure that we lay those out in a contract. Breach reporting, if they do have a cyber incident, how quickly are they going to notify us and share information so that we know how to protect ourselves if we have connectivity between us and the supplier, or more importantly, if we have to report a breach of CUI or something like that up to the DoD. So there's a lot of factors at work here, but putting those things in a contract shows the suppliers how serious we are about those things, and make sure that we pick the right supplier, because if they're not able to meet those contractual requirements, then maybe we need to go elsewhere in looking for whatever that service or capability is that we get from them. Another good way to do that, there's a number of third parties out there that do what I would call effectively compliance assessments, right? They'll do vulnerability scanning and other assessments on companies to come back to us and tell us, we found vulnerabilities that they haven't patched. We found weaknesses in their logins or things like that. And again, it helps us hold them accountable, especially if we have a contract that says you must encrypt our data or you must patch on a regular basis. And then the third party does a scan and comes back to us and says, hey, this company has a vulnerability from 2014 and they haven't patched it yet, right? It's important for us to know that. So documenting it in the contract, in my opinion, is one of the best ways that we've been able to show our suppliers how seriously we are about security, but also in a way it helps them mature their security program because they want the business. And so if they need to bring in new capabilities in order to have us as a customer, then that's something they can do based on what we've put in the contract.
Yeah, there's a lot there that I think resonates certainly with me, and I think with the audience. I mean, the idea of, first, it's obviously a requirement to flow down the DFARS language, but just the idea of using contracts and with your subcontractors to create the alignment with minimum cybersecurity standards and requirements is super important because, and it gives them a target, right? So cybersecurity, can mean 10 things to 9 different people sometimes if you ask for definitions. And so putting it into the contract, I think, gives your subs a chance to kind of at least know what the requirements are and then aim for those specific requirements versus kind of just knowing generally cybersecurity is important. So I love the idea of using the contract vehicle as a way to create that alignment. Speaking of alignment, very important to have alignment between your board and kind of your department, be it IT, security, or all of the above. And so, Sashi, you've got a big job. There's endless number of things you could convey to your board. I'm curious, and I think the audience would be very curious to know, how do you choose the topics you select for discussion with your board, and is security always on the agenda regardless?
Okay. So in manufacturing, they always say the first slide should be about safety. Okay. For me, I think the first slide is about security. So, if they ask me to give 2 slides, depending on the agenda, we have 10 slides, for the IT, or digital transformation, or maybe it's 2 slides. But if it's 2 slides, there's going to be 1 cybersecurity slide. Okay. So that's how it starts, right? So for me, I make sure that, we are, so basically the board is looking for is, are we secure? So when they check it out, they're not really looking at the nuances of all these things. So I have to create the content in such a way that they feel that, okay, we're spending money and we're getting what we're getting. So basically I look at the compliance, I look at SOC, and the patching. So some of this data point, I just say, okay, this is the breadth we did, and this is what we found, and this is how we mitigated. A very simple, straightforward way of communicating to them that, okay, we are doing something, we found something. If we had not done that, we would have been in trouble, and for what we did about that. So that way they get a full closed loop process of saying, okay, mitigate, fix and mitigate, and then make sure that it's not going to happen again. So we do that. And then, of course, they want to know what we're going to do in the future. Right? How else? Because it's a continuous improvement process. It's not, okay, you spend 3 months and you're done and gone, right? So we just got to show that how we're going to continue to strengthen our posture. As you guys all know that, bad actors have to get it right once and we have to get it right every single time, right? So we kind of show that how our org is set up to kind of meet that challenge. And of course, CyberSheet has been a great partner in that to help us out in that journey. So, and that makes our life easier. And then actually, the rest of the conversation becomes easier, right? Because that fear is gone out. And now my other slides becomes easier to present because saying, okay, these guys know what they're doing. And then now any pitch I have to do for the digital transformation, that becomes an easy task for me. That's how I see it.
I think that is fascinating. There's a lot of gold right in there in what you just said. I think one of the things that is so opaque, and we see like the Security and Exchange Commission now kind of pushing potentially board level experience relative to cybersecurity for publicly traded companies in the United States. And basically just this push for security to have a seat at the table and be part of the conversation at the board. And what you just described, Sashi, in great detail, I think about the way to, it just actually sounded unbelievably practical in plain English, a way to speak to the board versus trying to find the perfect metrics or the perfect framework to use to describe security to the board. So kind of what we're doing, how we measure success, what we want to do next, and value that you're getting. I think it's just what a great insight there. I think that most people they're not part of those conversations, and it's a little bit of a black box of what those conversations look like. So I think that's fascinating. Eric, similar question. Security is expansive. It's full of acronyms. And many times the audience, be it the board or senior leadership team, has a much different, often lower level of awareness than the folks in the trenches doing the work. And so, you have a big gap around education and awareness around cybersecurity potentially. So how do you effectively talk to your CIO, your senior leadership team, or board members when it comes to security? What do you do there?
Well, I think first off, the way that Sashi's doing it should be a model for everybody, right? I've worked for companies where there's a quarterly board update and security gets 2 minutes of that. And I've worked at companies where the security is not involved in that at all. And that's a big problem. I've worked at a company where, because the board wasn't asking about security, we drafted up a list of here's 20 things boards should be asking their companies to understand about cybersecurity. And we had our CIO present that to them. And next thing you know, the CISO was on the agenda at the very next board meeting to come talk about security. So you have to raise awareness, but you're right, with the amount of acronyms and technical knowledge that's needed to understand security and IT overall, you've got to find a way to speak to IT leaders, business leaders in a way that they understand it. I worked for a company once where a previous CIO said to us, you guys in security speak in Klingon to the business. They have no idea what you're talking about because you talk in acronyms, you talk very technical. And maybe while that was an interesting way to put it, it certainly rings true that it's important that we talk in a way that businesses and leaders, and especially our board, can understand. And so what we've done and what I recommend is that you shift the conversation to risk management, because that's what security is. It's all about managing risk. And so instead of talking about vulnerable systems and patching and things like that, you could talk about financial risk or reputational risk to systems or data. So I've posed the question to business leaders, instead of talking to them about patching their systems more frequently, asking them what would be the business impact if the data on that server or in that application was exposed publicly, or if that application was offline for 4 hours or 24 hours, what would be the impact? And when you start talking at that level, all of a sudden ears perk up and people start paying attention, because when you're talking about financial or reputational risk, that's something that's really important to the business. So I think it's certainly a way to talk to them and have them understand it, because security is hard, right? We've got to find a way to make things easier, because it's human nature to take the easiest path to get what you want. So if we make things too difficult, people will find a way to do it outside of the guardrails that we've put in. I heard someone say once that there is no such thing as shadow IT. Shadow IT is just the business's way of telling you that IT is not giving them what they want, and so they're going and doing it themselves, right? So we've got to find a way to include them and make this something that's easy. So I've seen in a number of companies that they're creating a role of a business liaison or a security business liaison that is embedded in the business line, that understands the business, understands IT and security, and can potentially be that bridge of communicating things that security or IT need the business to follow, or just as important, communicating things that the business needs from IT, because that stuff is often lost with technologists. So there's a number of different ways to do it, but I've seen those be the most effective.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of risk, putting it in context in terms the board can understand or leadership teams can understand, and not talking about web application firewalls or split tunneling and things that you shouldn't be talking to them about, I think is important. And they get risk because they have it in every area of the business, right? They have it in manufacturing, they have it in HR, they have it in finance. And, you mentioned something about some of the projects, Eric, around kind of, or risk generally. And I think, Sashi, one of the things is that when I think about risk, every IT project has security implications and risk implications. And one of the complaints I hear all the time is that from security teams is they're brought in at the last minute and too late in the process. So they're kind of viewed as the bad cop. And maybe it's because, as Eric said, it's because they know they're, maybe it's intentional because they know they're going to get the wrong answer for the business or a speed bump from the business. But how do you ensure security has a seat at the table and isn't kind of relegated to constantly playing catch up with IT? Because IT is usually out in front of this stuff.
So, okay, I think in my opening statement, I told that our philosophy is security is the foundation, right? So that kind of carries because they understand the IT organization understands that my first question is, did you talk to security? Right. So even before they come and talk to me, that'd be my first question. If they say no, we have not spoken, it's okay. We'll have another meeting later. First, you guys have to talk to each other, right? So they know by now that they cannot come to my office if they are not already spoken to each other before even starting the project or bringing it to my attention or how we do this, right? That's one. As another one is, I kind of create this. The teams, I call them as a main person and a partner for a lot of these projects. And I will try to put either I'll make a security person as the main person, depending on the project, or I will make them a partner. So sometimes I put them in a very, very uncomfortable position. The guy will come and ask, I don't even know what is this, right? Why are you putting me in this part with the project as a partner? I don't know, just be there, And the fact that they're being put in an uncomfortable position, they'll figure that out and say, oh, okay, now I get it. So they ask those uncomfortable questions. And then where I come is, sometimes the security guys seem like a pain because they're asking for all kind of things. They want to be perfect. They are the epitome. They are the best example of a pure engineer. They want to get every single I's dotted and T's crossed and all these things. So that's when I come in, or small business leaders come in and they say, okay, what is the risk? What is the probability of happening? What will happen if we don't do this, right? And then I take that, either I could take that risk myself and I say, okay, it's okay, we don't have to do this, or we can do this later. Or if I'm not that very comfortable, I will put that in front of the management, say, hey, you know what, we are in this situation. There's going to be a cost impact or time impact if we do this, if we don't do it. So what do you guys think? And I kind of very transparently lay it out, because again, everything has got cost, time attributed to this, right? So we just have to put that. And once we all agree, it's all documented, we said, okay, we're not doing this MFA for this particular area because it's a clean area and we can't do this or whatever reason. And we say, okay, what are the vulnerabilities we have if we don't do that? And what are the mitigation actions? And everyone is convinced, and then we just say, okay, go, let's go do that, right? So that way, I'm shielding my security guys, and I'm saying, something going to happen. That person is totally shielded. You say, I brought it up, I told you, and fair. We heard you, we listened to you, and as a management, we decided this is what we are willing to take as a risk, because that's something business always does, right? Whether it's a product development or quality or whatever it is, there is that risk mitigation, understanding of what exposure we have and how do we get over the exposure. So that's how we kind of build this whole synergies between IT and the security. I mean, for me, it is like, I feel it's one and the same. I know that there is a separation, but I feel it has to be one and the same, and it is one and the same in our organization.
So Sashi, what I think is so interesting about part of what you just said in your answer is, today, one of the guests that we're talking to is Steve Shirley. He's former executive director of the Defense Cyber Crime Center. He's now executive director of NDISAC. He's just got a long background in this space. And one of the questions I asked him, and he said, look, I don't want my answer to be trite, but a lot of this stuff's cultural and is leadership. And in what you said, I heard a lot of the same answer. Like, people know, when they come to Sashi as CIO, the first question is kind of, have you already talked to security? And so I think, even though it may sound simple and it's not a technical control or it's not a technology, I think the cultural piece of just embedding it in your leadership style, in my experience, that's like the only way to make security successful. So I appreciate that answer. Eric, from your perspective, what's good look like relative to how IT and security work together? Because sometimes there's friction. Sometimes security is under the CIO. Sometimes they're peers. I mean, there's many ways to structure those relationships. But can you give us an example of what good looks like when it's working?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think more times than not, there is friction, right? The role of the CISO is not really defined well in every company. It reports into different people. I've seen the CISO report into the CIO, into a risk management or a compliance officer, in some cases directly to the CEO. I think, in my opinion, what good looks like is when you can't tell the difference. when security and IT are working together as one team to where you don't see one creating problems for another. The way I always look at it is security should be invisible, right? It should be there. It should be in the background. It should work every time, providing risk management, helping employees do the work that they need to do as quickly as they can and as safely as they can with minimum disruption. So what I've seen in a lot of companies, or at least one particularly, is when IT and security are combined together as a team on a project team for whatever the new software capability, technology, whatever's being put into place, that IT and security are there from the beginning working together, because we talked about a lot in the beginning, right? The cost is significantly higher if security comes in at the end to say, here are requirements that you should have thought about. So you're right, it is a culture shift to get everybody together at the same time versus bringing some in at the end. I think that when this doesn't happen, projects take longer, they cost more, and they face risk of internal or external auditors coming in and issuing findings afterwards saying, you didn't think about security, so you can't go, you have to stop what you're doing, or you can't go live, right? In order to be able to move forward until you get some of these things cleared up. I think the way I like to explain it is, again, not in security terms. So I look at security like the brakes on a car, right? The brakes on a car are there to help someone go as fast as they need to go until they get to a curve, or in the case of a business, right, an area of risk, and then slow down just enough to navigate that risk or that curve and allow them to speed up again, right? And that's the way it needs to be, because if security is seen as a blocker or as a impediment to getting things done, like I mentioned earlier, people will find a way to go around it, and that's not where we want to be.
No, I think that's a great answer, and I appreciate the different perspectives here, because obviously, Sashi, as CIO, you have kind of the IT role and the security role, the teams underneath, and I think you gave us some great insights to answering a very similar question and how you make sure those teams work together. And then Eric with the security role and a global role as well, giving us the perspective of how you work within the construct, being kind of not necessarily having the responsibility for IT. And then both of you, just the different elements of your business, having both DoD portions and non-DoD portions. So, I think this has been an amazing session. I really do want to thank you, Eric and Sashi, because this is the kind of conversation I don't think the audience gets to hear. And I think one of the things that many people in our audience today have the responsibility for is like CMMC compliance, but they don't know how to potentially sell it, for lack of a better term, to their leadership to get things funded, and then how to measure it and how to talk about it to the board. So I really think our goal in this conference is always to give people something they can take back and use for themselves to get further along in their journey to compliance. And I think that you both gave us a lot of wisdom today that's going to allow them to do that. So thank you both for your time today. You've both been very generous, and it was my pleasure. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sashi and Eric, for discussing the intersection of IT and security and how it impacts compliance.